So good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome to our stroke research webinar, Hope for the Future. My name is Juliette Bouverie. I'm Chief Executive of the Stroke Association, and I'm absolutely delighted that you can join us for the next hour. We really appreciate your support and commitment to the Stroke Association, and I do hope you're all keeping safe and well. 2021 has started in a rather bleak way, hasn't it? So I do hope you and your families are keeping safe and well. So I'm going to kick off this webinar and just a few words by way of introduction. It would be great if you could keep your microphones muted, but we'd love to hear from you. So it would be great if you could introduce yourselves in the chat box. So if you could just type your full name and the organisation that you're representing in the chat box, that would be really helpful. And also please do post your questions as we go through the webinar, because we're going to have a question and answer session at the end. I thought it's also important to just let you know that we are recording this webinar just so that we can share it with wider audiences as well. So next slide, please. This is the agenda for this morning. As I said, it's going to be 60 minutes. So I will start off just talking to you about why the Stroke Association invests in research and how we deliver the biggest value and impact from our research spend. And then we're going to hear from two researchers who are funded by the Stroke Association, Dr. Cherry Kilbride and Dr. Grant Mayer. And I'd like to say thank you to both of you very much for joining us. And then we're also going to hear from Gillian Jordan, who's a trustee of the Private Physiotherapy Educational Foundation, who've worked in partnership with the Stroke Association for some years. And then we'll open it up to a Q&A panel discussion. So next slide, please. So why does the Stroke Association invest in stroke research? Well, as you're probably all aware, research is absolutely vital to find new advances and innovations in stroke treatment, in life after stroke, and importantly also in stroke prevention. And we know that stroke research gives hope to the 1.2 million people who are living with a stroke in the UK today, because it gives hope because we drive innovations in how we can stop stroke, treat stroke, and support people to rebuild their lives after stroke. The Stroke Association has been investing in stroke research for the last 30 years, and we've invested over £56 million in total. And that investment has established our charity as a prestigious research funder. And we've been at the forefront of many important developments in recent years in stroke treatment and care. But we also know that stroke research is underfunded. It's underfunded in comparison to the devastating impact that stroke has on people's lives. And it's also underfunded in comparison to other conditions such as cancer. So, for example, we know that current levels of research funding equate to around £48 per person for stroke, compared to nearly £250 per person with cancer and £118 per person with dementia. So there's a big disparity in terms of the research investment that goes into stroke. And sadly, stroke research receives only 1.2% of public and charity funds for health research overall. So it is an area that needs more investment. Next slide, please. So we thought we'd just do a quick poll to find out how well informed you feel about the Stroke Association's investment in research. So it would be great if you could just pop your answers into the chat box in terms of, do you agree, disagree, or are not sure about how well you feel informed about our research programme. So type your numbers in the chat box. Okay, so we're seeing the numbers coming through. So the provisional numbers are 80% of you agree that you feel well informed about our research programme. So that's absolutely fantastic. That's a much higher percentage than I anticipated. And 0% of you disagree. So that's really encouraging. So I'm glad you're feeling informed. I hope this webinar will increase your levels of knowledge and understanding, and we'll come back to the poll at the end of the Q&A session. So thank you. So next slide, please. So what are the Stroke Association's hopes and ambitions for stroke research? Well, in 2019, we updated our research strategy for the next 5 years, and it's fair to say that we've got some ambitious goals. And the first is about building capacity across multiple disciplines. So what do we mean by that? Well, the Stroke Association wants to play its part in growing the next generation of stroke research leaders so that we can drive that innovation in stroke prevention, treatment and care that I talked about. So we have a commitment to funding researchers at different stages of their careers, giving financial support to lecturers and fellows so that they can grow and develop their careers in stroke research. And we do that across all disciplines of stroke clinical practice. So we fund doctors, nurses, and importantly, therapists, including speech and language therapists and physiotherapists, to engage more with stroke research. The second priority is for us to increase the overall amount of funding that goes into stroke research. And the key way in which we do that is both by advocating for the importance of stroke research, but also developing partnerships with other organisations, because it's through partnerships that we can pool our funds, but we can also share and harness each other's expertise and knowledge. And the third area that we want from our research strategy is to make sure that every pound that we're spending on research is a pound spent wisely and well. We want to invest in areas of research that will achieve the greatest impact for people affected by stroke and will make the biggest difference to their lives. And one of the ways in which we ensure that we are focusing on priorities that matter to stroke survivors in that and their carers is by constantly doing market research to find out what they think is important in terms of stroke research for the future. So that's just a whistle-stop summary of our research strategy. It is published on our website, so please do have a look if you'd like to find out more information or speak to a member of our research team. So next slide, please. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the charity. It's fair to say that along with all other charities, it has had an enormous impact. So from mid-March, we saw an immediate drop in our income as many of our face-to-face fundraising events, but also other activities had to be cancelled. And we have sadly seen a slowing down of our fundraised income. And that unfortunately does mean that for this year and in the short to medium term, we are having to reduce our spend on stroke research by up to 50%. The pandemic has also had a major impact on our stroke researchers who from mid-March were unable, sadly, to access their laboratories, clinics and collaboration spaces. Some of our stroke researchers were asked to work on COVID research or have been redeployed into clinical practice and working on acute COVID wards. So we spoke to our researchers, and back in May, 49 of the researchers that we spoke to, of those, 3/4 said that they'd had to pause their projects. And we're encouraged to see that quite a number of those projects that were paused at the beginning of the pandemic are now beginning to get back on track, but not all of them. And so we are seeing a slowing of momentum, sadly, in that vital research that we need for the future. Next slide, please. But having said that, I have to say that we've still managed to maintain some important partnerships, and we're still managing to give out new research grants. It's fair to say that over the last few years, we've been expanding the number and range of organisations that we work in partnership with. And we're currently funding research in partnership with 7 organisations. And you can see some examples on the left-hand side of this slide. So partners include the Association of British Neurologists, Fight for Sight, MedCity, and the National Institute for Health Research, funded by the Department of Health and Social Care. So that's really encouraging. And we've also been working with other medical research charities, coordinated by the Association of Medical Research Charities, to highlight that actually we need continued investment and momentum behind research for people with long-term conditions. And so the Association of Medical Research Charities, with our support, has been putting pressure on government to create a matched government charity life sciences partnership, because we know that we need more research and funding for the future. Next slide, please. So a good example of our collaborative and partnership work is our partnership with MedCity. MedCity is a world-leading not-for-profit organisation that works to drive growth and investment in the health sector for the well-being of the population. And we're working with MedCity to help improve the research evidence into treatment technologies and medical devices that help to improve stroke rehabilitation. So we're funding 3 MedCity projects. And what we're doing is we're matching small and medium-sized enterprises which develop technologies for stroke rehabilitations, and we're matching them with academic teams. And we're doing that because we want to understand the evidence about which technologies really work and can be effective in supporting and enhancing stroke rehabilitation. And we want to make those that are effective and cost-effective scalable across the UK so that all stroke survivors can benefit from them. So I'm delighted to announce our first speaker, Dr. Cherry Kilbride, who's the lead academic partner on one of these brilliant MedCity partnership projects. So over to you, Cherry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Juliet, for that introduction. And thank you for inviting Guillaume and myself here today to be part of this exciting event. Before I go on to tell you a little bit more about the partnership work Brunel have been doing with Neurophoenix, I'd like to just share with you a short recording of the Neuroball so it can help to demonstrate to you some of the benefits of technology and innovation that Juliet has just been talking about. So please, could we have the recording now? Thank you.
If you've suffered a stroke or care for someone that has, you know that recovery can be a long road of repetitive and boring exercises. The Neuroball is a smart device that trains all key arm and hand movements, adapts to your ability, and measures your progress over time. Now Richard, a neurophysiotherapist, and Jackie, a stroke survivor, will show you what it looks like to use the Neuroball.
This game really focuses on that, trying to get that turnover and that from side to side, and doing it in a way that's more fun and more entertaining, rather than sitting there and trying to just turn your hand over and back again on the table. It's more engaging, so Jackie can concentrate on the game and making her movements much more automatic. On this game, the opponents shoot at you and you want to try and avoid those, so that keeps that motivation and keeps that drive to keep going.
Now Mina will share her first-hand experience of using the Neuroball.
Neuroball has made my movements a lot more easier, a lot more faster, I can do my wrist up and down. I can bend it and forward it, sideways, up and down. And it's been wonderful. Thanks to NeuroBall, today I am, where I can lift my hand up to this level to take it to the mouth and up to my little bit of head and cheek. I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That really makes me realise, why I go to work and why we do this partnership working. So I'm now going to just give you a whistle-stop tour through, Juliet was talking about the evidence and the need to build evidence for innovations. And so if we could move on to the next slide, please, because I want to talk about what's the problem that we're trying to address. So we know it's a sizable problem because every 5 minutes somebody is having a stroke. And we know that following stroke, many people initially experience having upper limb problems, and not enough people regain full function of their arm. And unfortunately, loss of this arm and hand function can result in increased dependency, decreased quality in life, and feeling lower psychological well-being. Next slide, please. We also know that high intensity, so if you can go through these bullet points with me, please. So we know that high intensity, high frequency exercise improves arm function. So we know that the more that we do, it helps. And we know that more rehabilitation is needed to drive arm improvements post-stroke, because observational studies have shown that on average, the stroke survivor is doing about 32 repetitions of movement during inpatient sessions. This doesn't fit with the criteria of high intensity, high frequency. And we know that this is difficult to achieve given, NHS resources before, let alone with the pandemic, and all sorts of resource constraints that we have. And then we know that it's also difficult, as it was alluded to in the recording, that to self-direct yourself to do this intensive practice can be boring. It's hard to keep your motivation going, and so therefore adherence to doing things is low. So what can we do? So next slide, please. Yeah, so what can we do and what can be done? So key ingredients of the solution. On to the next slide, please. So those key ingredients of the solution, if you can just pop all the bits up there of all the different bits, basically it's about having clinicians. I am a neurophysiotherapist myself with many years of experience in the NHS, and I'm also a stroke researcher, and I work with a group of people similarly as myself at Brunel. So we are clinicians who research, but we can't do things on our own. So with the other key ingredient into our cake of success is Neurophoenix, who are a specialist bioengineering organization. And of course, we couldn't be making any of this progress without having the very important ingredient of embedded stroke survivor input the whole way through trying to develop our solution and the development of the NeuroBall. And of course, we're now lucky enough to have been awarded the Stroke Association MedCity grant to help us in our quest to deliver digital health solutions to improve arm and hand rehabilitation across the stroke pathway. So I'm now going to pass over to my colleague, Guillaume from Neurophoenix, who's just going to say a little bit more about the NeuroBall and our innovations. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherry, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Guillaume Singler, and I'm the Chief Executive of Neurophoenix. Just a little bit about Neurophoenix. The driving force to start this company was my uncle who had a stroke. It was devastating, and basically I just experienced firsthand the lack of therapy that patients receive. and basically COVID-19 has made this worse. However, I'm confident that together we can make a big difference. We started Neurophoenix to build a world where stroke survivors receive all the therapy they need and really maximize their potential for recovery. And here in this slide, you can see what we think will help reach this goal. We are building, together with Brunel, a one-of-a-kind digital platform that provides a wide range of therapies, upper limb, lower limb, cognition, speech and language, all in one place. And this platform, we believe, should include a wide range of devices and activities to make therapy fun, easy, and affordable. The Neurable is our first product focused on the arm and hand. And as Cherry was mentioning, it really promotes, or it really helps patients to do hundreds of repetitions, which is essential for that recovery. And what makes it unique is that we've worked very hard to make it so that patients can use it independently. And that's very hard, but we've achieved that. Regarding Brunel, we approached Cherry and the team at Brunel 4 years ago with a very early version of the prototype, and we've been working together for over 4 years. And their clinical expertise and their research expertise have been essential and continue to be essential to continue developing the Neurable and the platform. And I would just like to end by saying thank you to the Stroke Association support to help us continue building this essential evidence base behind the Neurable and the platform. Thank you, and back to you, Cherry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So if we can move on to the next slide, I think what I want to really just stress here is Guillaume talked about independent exercise, and in our previous, so Rhombus 1 is our study that's led us to this, us being awarded this project from the Stroke Association, funding. And within the previous community dwelling study, this was with stroke survivors who were well-established stroke survivors and had a continuum of arm function from those with mild up to very severe arms, because it's our mission to try to make something that's available for all stroke survivors, not just those who have got better functioning arms. So we found that this wide range of people with function were able to undertake a high amount of independent upper limb exercise using the Neurable device. And from my point of view as a physiotherapist, I was delighted to see that people were getting more movement, and these were, like, say, established stroke survivors. And this movement was particularly in their wrist and in their shoulder. Now, this also meant that there was less pain being experienced, or the risk of pain in the shoulder was decreased through this, and we found therefore that the device was safe and feasible for use. So from these findings, we were able to then put in the application for the current study. If next slide, please. And it was acceptable to the stroke survivors as well. They very much enjoyed it. So, and told us that they wanted to be able to have access. They would have liked to have had access to this device in the earlier stages of the stroke recovery. So this is the study that we've funded by the Stroke Association MedCity, and you can read the details about what it is there. But the unique part of this is that we're looking for trying to help stroke survivors establish their own self-belief in taking exercise for their arm from when they're in hospital through to being at home and then onwards. So people, if they are recruited to the study whilst in the stroke unit, they will get their own Neurable to use. They can then take it home with them and still use it whilst with the early supported discharge team, etc. So it can be used as an adjunct to normal rehabilitation, but also importantly, it's about giving the stroke survivors the tools to undertake independent exercise from the get-go to try to instill that ethos of independent, self-management of their condition. Okay, so next slide, please. Final slide. Thank you. Penultimate slide. We just wanted to show here that how we've completely embedded, you know, like say our team is stroke survivors, Neurophoenix and Brunel. And you can see that from day one, stroke survivors have been integral to this, and they continue to be so as well. So thank you to everybody. We wouldn't be where we are without that expert input. Thank you. And so now final slide, please. So thank you. And if you can just whiz through those bullet points, please. I want to say that partnership working is the lifeblood of innovation. I can't stress that enough. I'm so delighted that Stroke Association are working with MedCity because, you know, together we can go on to co-create health solutions for real life problems. Without this funding, we couldn't test the Neuroball in the early stroke pathway. And, you know, Stroke Association funding is prestigious. It does open doors to future funding, such as other NIHR pathways and other things. So really, this is a huge stepping stone for us, because what we want to do, once we've tested it, we've tested the Neuroball in community, now going into, like say, these acute and subacute pathway of stroke, we then want to go on to and do a definitive effectiveness trial, which means that it's fully powered and we can really look at testing and measuring the true effect of the Neuroball. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to tell you about this work. Thank you.
Chari, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I think we really look forward to seeing the outcomes of Rhombus 2. So I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Grant Mair, who is one of the Stroke Association's research lecturers. And Grant is particularly interested in the first few hours after stroke. We know time is brain, and he's particularly interested in how we can use cutting-edge computer science, including artificial intelligence, to build improvements and innovation. And Grant was awarded his 5-year lectureship by the Stroke Association in 2018. And I think it's fair to say that we're already seeing great success in establishing partnerships with researchers across many different disciplines in stroke research. So welcome, Grant, and thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you, Juliet. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for coming along today. So I just wanted to share with you some of my experiences as a Stroke Association funded clinical lecturer and the importance to me of the support that I receive. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. So when researchers like me seek support for their research, we usually present a problem that needs attention. And this is the problem that I presented. That every year in the UK, approximately 100,000 people are affected by stroke. This is Wembley Stadium, and it's an Adele concert. You've got 90,000 people seated and 10,000 people on the pitch. That's how many people have a stroke every year in the UK. About 20% of these people, though, we don't know exactly when their stroke symptoms began, perhaps because they wake up with their symptoms or they're unable to tell us and the symptom onset is not witnessed. As you're probably aware, there are 2 highly effective treatments to reduce death and disability that can be offered acutely to people affected by ischemic stroke. That is, those with a blocked artery. Next step. First, intravenous alteplase, which is a drug to break down blood clots, and second, mechanical thrombectomy, where the offending blood clot is physically pulled out via a catheter. However, both of these treatments have time limits, meaning we require precise knowledge of when symptoms began. Next step. So unfortunately, about 20,000 people are excluded annually in the UK. Now, you may also be aware that recent clinical trials have shown that if we perform what is termed advanced imaging, next step, we can identify that some of these 20,000 people do still benefit from treatment despite not knowing the time of symptom onset. Unfortunately, this type of advanced imaging using CT perfusion or MRI is not widely available, especially outside of normal working hours, in smaller hospitals without dedicated stroke care, or in poorer countries. So one of the principal aims of my Stroke Association funded research is to determine if we can accurately estimate when stroke symptoms began using only their CT brain scans. Next step. which is the initial test offered to the vast majority of people affected by stroke. In other words, I hope to simplify the process of finding people who should be offered treatment. Next slide. So how do we do this? And just perhaps go to the end of that slide. Well, we know that an ischemic stroke progresses, the injured brain becomes more obvious with time on CT. This is because the injured brain tissue slowly fills with fluid. So at the top left of this image, you can see 3 images from the same patient at different time points after the onset of the stroke, 4, 30 and 100 hours. And you can see that the lesion is becoming progressively darker and progressively more obvious. So my idea is that if we can precisely map the relationship between brain injury on CT and time, minute by minute, across many real people where time of stroke onset is known, we can then use this information to estimate the time elapsed in other people using only their CT scan. Next slide, please. So to give you an example of how this might work, I want to show some examples upon which you can test your discriminative ability. I should say that all of these images are anonymized and that people have consented to have their pictures used for research, education and training. So next step, I'm going to keep up the previous slide as a guide. And then the next 2 steps, please, just very carefully, just 2 steps so we don't give away the answer. So the image on the left there, can you estimate whether this person is less or more than 4.5 hours from their stroke symptom onset using the top right images as a guide? 4.5 hours is important because that's the cutoff that we have for using intravenous alteplase. I'll give you just a minute to consider that. Now, if you perhaps progress to the next 2 steps. So the answer is less than 4.5 hours. You can probably see where the lesion is difficult to see, and that's part of the challenge of my job day to day. But you can see that it's most in keeping with the 4-hour image on the top right. Next slide, please. And the next 2 steps. So in this case, would you say that this image is more or less than 4.5 hours from onset? And again, next 2 steps, please. So yes, hopefully you've appreciated that this is more obvious and it's more like perhaps the middle image, and it is about 24 hours from onset. So this patient we could not treat with alteplase if this was the scan that came at presentation. Next slide. And again, next step, stop there, yeah. So what about this lesion? And then next 2 steps as well. So of course this is a trick question. This is not a stroke lesion, but I include it here to demonstrate that other conditions such as this can mimic stroke, and users of methods such as mine need to have a basic grounding in reading CT. This point becomes even more relevant when we consider the rise of automated artificial intelligence methods for processing medical imaging. Next slide, please. Of course, this project is only part of my supported research activity. Much more is collaborative through a network of partnerships. I'm based here in Edinburgh. Next 2 steps. But within Scotland, I'm working with colleagues in Public Health Scotland to enable the creation of a medical imaging safe haven, the Scottish Medical Imaging or SMI project, which will allow all routinely collected medical imaging in Scotland to be available for research. Next slide. And the next 3 steps, I think. Within the UK, I'm working on projects funded by Health Data Research UK, the Royal College of Radiologists and the Turing Institute. I'm part of interdisciplinary collaborative teams with computer scientists and fellow clinicians from several UK universities, Edinburgh, Dundee, Oxford, developing artificial intelligence methods for improving the detection of stroke lesions on CT and using natural language processing to understand radiology reports within very large data sets. I'm also part of a collaboration funded by the Stroke Association tasked with testing a commercially available AI software designed for use with stroke imaging. And finally, I'm a member of the Stroke Thrombolysis Trialists Collaboration, or the STTC, which is conducting the largest ever patient-level meta-analysis of imaging data from 9 randomised controlled trials of thrombolysis. Through this, we hope to understand whether brain imaging appearances should alter alteplase treatment decisions, i.e. if a patient has this appearance or that appearance, does it make a difference? Next slide, please. And worldwide, I read scans for various international randomised clinical trials. Next step. Some examples are going to appear on the screen. I also provide research supervision and examinations for the next generation of scientists. Just progress through those steps, please. And act as a peer reviewer for scientific publications and funding applications. All this activity relies on 2 things, collaboration and support. And in turn, these activities lead to greater recognition, including invitations to write and to speak, next step, in public fora. And next slide, please. So Stroke Association funding is vital to me for all of this activity. By supporting my lectureship, the Stroke Association, they principally pay for my time. Can you just proceed through the steps here as I go? Thank you. This enables me to collaborate and to form networks, to build a research team. It allows me to sit down and conduct research and to disseminate the findings of research in scientific journals and through presentations at major conferences. Ultimately, the Stroke Association is helping me to become a research leader, and their support includes other important activities such as dedicated leadership training. The hope, of course, is that we start a virtuous cycle, continually elevating, highlighting and funding further stroke research for the benefit of all those people affected by stroke. Next slide, please, and perhaps just step to the end. I just wanted to conclude today by coming back to my research question around estimating the time of stroke onset on CT, or the CT clock tool as we're now calling it. So far we have shown that my proposed method is feasible. In other words, it can work. We had this initial analysis published in a peer-reviewed journal there on the top left of the screen. The top right figure shows the actual change in CT attenuation that we measured against time, i.e. the progressive darkening of the injured brain. The bottom left figure shows how well this works on a sample of patients when we estimate time of stroke onset using only their CT appearances. The vertical dotted line represents the 4.5-hour licensing limit for the clot-busting drug alteplase. Green dots and red dots represent patients correctly categorized as more or less than 4.5 hours from onset. Put another way, our method is highly accurate. So for next steps, we need to test these methods in patients as they kind of come to hospital. First, we're going to use scans that have already been collected in routine healthcare via the Scottish Medical Imaging, or SMI, safe haven I described earlier. Second, next step, we will need to test this in real time for patients as they present to hospital. That requires a clinical trial and a team of people, for which we will seek further funding. Most likely, this is going to come from other major research funders, thereby compounding the investment the Stroke Association has made in me, that virtuous cycle I mentioned earlier. But ultimately, my hope for the future is that this process will improve acute stroke care by changing clinical practice for the better. Next slide. So thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed it.
Grant, that was brilliant, absolutely fascinating. And I mean, so good to know that you're, a Stroke Association funded lecturer with kind of global impact, but also I think, your research will be pivotal in ensuring that more of those 20% of people who currently don't get any stroke treatment, that more could be eligible for treatment in the future, which feels really important. So thank you. So I'd now like to introduce our final speaker, who's Gillian Jordan, a trustee of the Private Physiotherapy Educational Foundation, who the Stroke Association have worked in partnership with for many years. So over to you, Gillian.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Could I have the first slide, please? Thank you. I'll tell you a little bit about PPEF, Private Physiotherapy Education Foundation. We're a small charity in terms of the size of some charities. We have a very specific purpose, and that is to fund physiotherapy research and postgraduate education. Our objectives are quite straightforward: helping physiotherapy to make a difference. And so we aim to further physiotherapy knowledge and skill for the benefit of the general public. We don't seek funding. We use the funds that we have. They're very carefully invested, and we use the interest each year to support relatively small projects compared with some of the things you're hearing about today. I'll speak very briefly, and we're only for physiotherapists. So if it's a team of physiotherapists, a multidisciplinary team, it has to be a physiotherapist who is leading the research project. I want to say a little bit about our founder, Kenneth Balfour, because it's very interesting. He was a businessman who lived quite a long time. He served in the Second World War, got the Military Cross. He was a very sporting person, and he had a lot of physiotherapy. Over time, he actually married his physiotherapist, and so that was a useful thing for us. And they had already decided that he would leave a legacy to support physiotherapy research. Unfortunately, his wife died, but then Kenneth developed Parkinson's disease and so had even more physiotherapy. And he wanted to commemorate both his wife and physiotherapy, which had been so helpful to him throughout his life. And he left a legacy in his will specifically to set up PPEF. Now, it is not just for private physiotherapists, but its foundation had to come through a private physiotherapy association, but we support anybody. We have 8 trustees, 7 are physiotherapists, and we cover a very wide area of practice, both clinical and higher education, and we have a financial advisor who keeps an eye on the investments. Normally, we invite applications 3 times a year, and all trustees read all the applications. We meet together and discuss thoroughly, and then we make our decisions based on reality, feasibility, relevance, and so on. Obviously, since COVID, we've had a financial downturn, and many current projects are on hold, both by the researchers and because we're not making any new grants. Next slide, please. We've worked regularly with the Stroke Association for over 10 years. We have really strong links. Trustees are invited regularly to Stroke Association events where we have the opportunity of meeting staff, other funders, researchers, patients, and families. The Stroke Association are very good at keeping us up to date, so we have newsletters and updates on a regular basis. And we have fully and partly funded several projects that are related to physiotherapy research into various aspects of stroke. And I would just like to say that the Stroke Association is exemplary in sending PPEF regular reports on the progress of all the projects that we are partially or fully funding. Next slide, please. These are just some of the projects that we have funded over the last few years. I didn't put on there the AVERT study, which I should have, which was the very early rehabilitation trial, which is a national project. When we're looking, you can see we've covered a range of things from early rehabilitation. The community walking was an interesting one. There was to try and give patients confidence in their walking so that they were encouraged to think of something else or carry out another movement whilst they were walking to give them better confidence that they wouldn't fall. The others are also interesting. Ben Beer has just finished a very comprehensive project looking at treatable causes of early post-stroke shoulder pain. If you can get that dealt with to begin with, then we hope that not so many patients will develop frozen shoulders. So when we receive, no, I said that, sorry. Next slide, please. Right, well, I don't think I'm in a position to talk about what modern treatment is. I'd just like to say that I've been qualified as a physiotherapist for over 50 years, and I have seen enormous changes in the way stroke patients are treated right from the beginning. and onwards. And for one stage, I was on a local stroke committee and that was extremely interesting at the time when the hyperacute stroke units were being developed. And that has made a big difference relating to our previous speaker, in that patients are now directed straight to a special A&E, and then they're given whatever early treatments are needed, including the embolectomies and so on, and then they're transferred to the hyperacute unit where their initial treatment and it takes place. Then they're transferred to an ordinary stroke unit. So that's an enormous difference from the times when patients who had a stroke might finish up on a general medical ward and might get some treatment tomorrow, but probably a bit late to give it today. And I think that has been so important. And I think another important aspect of development is the early supported discharge plans and the liaison between stroke units in hospitals and community stroke services. Now, NICE recommends 45 minutes of physiotherapy 5 days a week as part of a 7-day specialist rehabilitation service. That's taking time to be fully integrated, but patients do get a lot more treatment now than they used to. And we say that rehabilitation should continue as long as the person is showing measurable benefit from treatment and continues to achieve their agreed goals. And I think you will find many stroke patients who had their stroke some time ago who will wish they had been able to have treatment over a longer period. And of course, the work we do with patients has changed enormously over this time. And to now there's a lot of use of assistive equipment, from treadmills and robot-assisted walking, and an arm function device like the one that Cherry has just shown you. Now there are lots of smartphone apps that do everything from encouraging patients to do their exercises and counting their steps and such like, and even some virtual reality training. I just want to finish. If I find a bit of paper, it would help. The Chartered Society of Physiotherapy is our governing body. And there was a time when they would publish research priorities on a regular basis, and they would be something like low back pain or knee injuries or whatever. But now I think they've moved very well forward, and they have now published the general principles of research priorities. And these are quite clear and very helpful. We have to remember that people are living longer, often with more than one long-term condition. Care is delivered in a greater variety of ways and closer to home. And there is a much greater emphasis on helping people manage their conditions themselves and promoting healthy lifestyles, rather than the physiotherapist being a person who does something to someone. And I think another very exciting thing is the development of technology. And I wonder if we run this conference again in a couple of years, how many changes there will be in the use of technology. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gillian. And we're very, very grateful to you for all your support for stroke research. So I'm going to, in a minute, introduce the Q&A and the panel. But just before I do that, I just wanted to explain how you can help. So it's fair to say, as I said at the beginning, that the coronavirus pandemic has impacted our income. We've done some modelling for the future, and we believe that our income is likely to reduce on an ongoing basis. Before the pandemic, our total income was about £36 million per annum. We now believe that going forwards, it's more likely to be £32 million per annum. So we really want to continue to invest in stroke research, but we do desperately need more funding for us to be able to maintain our pre-pandemic levels of funding into stroke research. So we'd love it if you or anyone else is able to support us financially. But we would also really welcome introductions to any other people in your network who you think might be interested in supporting us. So if you have ideas of other people who we might want to follow up with, I'd be very grateful if you could get in touch with a member of our research team. So next slide, please. So brilliant presentations. Thank you very, very much to the presenters. So I would now like to introduce the Q&A panel, and in particular to introduce two people who you haven't yet heard from. Richard Francis, who's our Head of Research Awards at the Stroke Association, and Neil Johnston, one of our stroke survivors who has in fact used the NeuroBall. So if any of you have any questions about what he sees as the benefits, Neil will be happy to answer them. So over to you, Emma, to facilitate the Q&A.
Great, thanks, Juliet, and thank you to all of our speakers. It really has been a brilliant session. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and we've had lots of good questions coming in. Apologies if we don't get round to them all. We will do some follow-ups. So if your question isn't answered, we'll try and get those responses to you after the webinar later on in the week. So I'm going to actually kick things off, I think, with a question for Dr. Cherry Kilbride. So Cherry, you said, which I thought was brilliant, I might steal this phrase, that partnership working with the lifeblood of innovation. Can you tell us a little bit more about particularly the involvement of people affected by stroke in your work? Has there been anything particularly that's surprised you when you've been working with people who have had direct experience of stroke?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think for both myself and, the NeuroPhoenix guys, that we are constantly amazed by the insights that people can give us. So it's actually hearing about the ingenuity of people, the insights from stroke survivors, and how they can suggest things that we would, perhaps never really think of, just because, I'm touching wood here that, I'm not in that position. So it's very difficult. So that's why it's so crucial that we are all absolutely part of the team, because we need to be able to take in that, those, like say, the insights and the experiences of everybody and really understanding it from multi directions. I can't say one thing, but it's just love working with the team all the time. It's just non-stop learning.
Brilliant. And that kind of brings you to Neil. So Neil has been having some technical difficulties. Hopefully you've got him now. Neil, you have experience, obviously you yourself are a stroke survivor and you've been working and you've experienced using the NeuroBall. But from your perspective, what extra insight can someone who's had a stroke give, and why is it so important to involve people in research that have had a stroke? Oh, I think we might have just lost Neil again. We'll try and get him back later. I guess in the meantime, we did have a lot of questions coming in the chat about the NeuroBall and about purchasing this and its availability. Richard, are you able to sort of explain a little bit about that and how people might be able to access the NeuroBall? Oh, Richard, I think you're muted. If you can unmute. Oh, okay. We also can't hear Richard right now.
I can add in if
Cherry, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, so in terms of the NeuroBall is available, and let's say people can contact NeuroPhoenix directly, and perhaps the email address or something can go up in the chat box. But there is also, importantly, there is a clinical physiotherapist who's also a researcher on the team, Dr. Karen Baker, who's able to offer assistance with setup and sort of some, higher level clinical issues should they arise. And so, in terms of actually, it is available for people to try. And there is a renting model rather than a buying model, which may be more suited to people.
Great, thank you so much. So moving on to another question that we had, this one for Dr. Grant Mayer. Hope you're ready, Grant. I hope we can hear you. So someone said that the the CT clock tool sounds extremely interesting. Could you explain a little bit more about how this would be used with stroke patients, sort of its practical application?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what we hope to do with it is to open up treatment avenues for more patients. But the way that would work is that a patient would come to hospital, they'd have their plain CT scan that most patients get. And for that 20% that we can't currently treat, we ought to be able to then say, okay, actually, a proportion of these we can treat them on the basis of the research that we did over here that said, you know, this tissue is still viable, these patients are still suitable for treatment, essentially. That's kind of the way that it would work. It opens up treatment options to patients who currently don't have them, unless we do other things like advanced imaging, which just isn't widely available.
Brilliant, that's really interesting. And I guess also for you, Grant, it was great to see the sort of the maps with all of your different collaborations and partnerships in it. What do you see as being the biggest challenge? Obviously, we've heard a lot about the advantages of working with other partners, but what do you see as being the biggest challenge in that sort of collaborative work?
I think probably the challenge of it is when there are deadlines and you're working in different time zones and different working practices. You know, in countries that might have a siesta, you think, why aren't you replying to me? You know, they're busy relaxing in the afternoon. And also if there are tasks that perhaps don't have a clear leadership defined at the beginning, it gets very difficult because kind of everyone wants to be the leader on it. So it's nice to just kind of really clearly say what you want to do, who's going to do what, have a clear plan. But mostly it's a very positive experience, I think.
Sorry, thank you, Grant. I also managed to mute myself then. Technology, the joys of it. So we just had another question come in, which is also for Dr. Cherry Kilbride. You said that you're looking to gather evidence to perform a bigger trial for the NeuroBall. Can you explain what sort of evidence exactly you need? You know, what are you hoping to find now that would enable and facilitate that bigger trial?
That's a really great question. Thank you to whoever asked that. As we know that in Rhombus 1, we successfully tested the NeuroBall to find out that it was safe, it was easy to use, and people liked it. And so that was established in people who were post 6 months from stroke, well, 6 months up to 10 years, something in that region. We now need to test in terms of to make sure that we're building devices and innovation on the best evidence. We now need to test that out in a different part of the stroke pathway. I said earlier on about the earlier stroke pathway. By that I mean it's where people are either just coming out of the hyperacute stroke unit back into the acute stroke unit, or at home with whilst with the early supported discharge team, up until 6 months. So we sort of close that evidence pathway, and we're looking to see how it works, because the difference, we envisage, the challenges and the benefits are going to be different in the earlier stages, just because of people's are at a different stage of the stroke pathway, and so we need to be able to test that out properly. We also want to find out more about adoption of innovation within the NHS, and this is going to, being able to do this study in the NHS is going to enable us to help to answer that question too. And then the next study we'll do, tracing the stroke survivor across the whole care pathway, and join it up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Cherry. Thank you guys all. I'm really sorry about the technical difficulties that we had, but unfortunately we're running short on time. So I'm going to hand back to Juliet for a few closing remarks.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you to all of our panelists. It's been a brilliant session. So I just want to close really with the next slide, and we're going to run the poll again just to see if this webinar has had any impact on your knowledge and understanding about the Stroke Association's investment in research. So if we could go live with the poll and people could type in their answers, that would be fantastic. Fantastic. So are we seeing any results from the poll yet? I feel like I should be doing a drum roll. Suspense, the anticipation, the excitement. Wow, that's brilliant. So it's gone up from 80% of people agreeing to now 93% of people agreeing that they feel informed about the Stroke Association's investment in research. So that's brilliant. Thank you all very much for your participation. I do hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Thank you again to our amazing speakers and panelists. And we look forward to further conversations in the future. If you've got any further questions, please do speak to our research team. But in the meantime, thank you and keep safe and well. Bye-bye.